Abuse isn't always loud and violent. It can often be silent. So let's talk about covert abuse. Before I get into the silent abuse, I want to say there is intentional harm and unintentional harm. Intentional is when somebody's doing it on purpose, and unintentional is when someone is accidentally hurting other people without being aware of it. First type of abuse could be someone that is dismissive and avoidant. So if somebody approaches them with a feeling or a discomfort, whether they're sad or they're upset, and they dismiss, they ignore, they invalidate the other person's feelings, they tell them they're too sensitive, they tell them to be positive, they stonewall them, which means shutting down by either going silent and ignoring or walking away by avoiding any uncomfortable feelings or conversations. These people often grow up with parents or caregivers that were completely unavailable. So they were never taught how to feel uncomfortable emotions. So if someone comes at them with a natural human emotion like sadness or anger, they don't know how to process that. So they will immediately dismiss, invalidate, and tell you to change because they don't know how to sit with that uncomfortable feeling. Their whole energy is about avoidance with a subconscious intent to punish the other person for having those uncomfortable feelings and making them feel uncomfortable. I will dismiss, ignore, and invalidate you in order for you to change how you feel because I cannot feel that discomfort in me. And if you cannot change what you're saying or doing, I will abandon you. So basically, they do this for survival and to protect themselves. But when it becomes abusive is when they know they're hurting the other person, they see the pain in the other person, and they keep doing it. The second type of silent abuse is someone that is very present and very loving, and when they feel uncomfortable emotions, they withdraw, and then again, come back, and then withdraw. Basically, extremely inconsistent in their connection with others. So these people have a push-pull dynamic. They crave the closeness with others, but they fear that they're going to lose their independence. This person does not have the ability to self-soothe and self-regulate and self-validate, so they are completely dependent on other people to make them feel better when they're uncomfortable. The reason it could be silent abuse is because of the inconsistency. They usually have a fear of abandonment, but often end up abandoning others. They absolve, self-project their biggest fear, which means they absolve themselves of any wrongdoing and keep rejecting somebody over and over. They don't want to be invalidated, but they will invalidate other people by abandoning them. So basically, the two first types of abuse have a lot of inconsistencies where they use the fight or flight response to harm the other person. Let me explain using a scientific study that was done with rats. They put rats in a cage and they taught them to press a button to get food. And consistently, every time the rats pressed the button, food would drop. So the rats, in a very healthy way, pressed the button when they were hungry and then went about their day. Now the scientists stopped the food from coming when the rats pressed the button. So at first, the rats started pressing the button and no food was coming. So eventually they learned no food is going to come, so we just won't press the button. Then the scientists decided to try it sporadic, so it was very inconsistent. Sometimes the rats would press the button, food would come. Sometimes they pressed the button, there would be no food. What they noticed is the rats became obsessed with the button. They noticed the rats pressing the button even when they weren't hungry, and they became very chaotic and erratic. Very similar to rats, humans need consistency. So if you're in a relationship with someone and you throw a frisbee, you expect them to throw it back, a nice exchange of energy. When you throw a frisbee at someone and it's very random and sometimes they throw it at you and sometimes they don't, and sometimes when they don't is to punish you for something, that is a form of silent abuse. Whether they are punishing you by invalidating you and ignoring you and dismissing you because you brought out some uncomfortable feelings, or they're hot and cold and inconsistent, it leaves the person not just confused and doubting their reality, but they end up shaming and guilting themselves. They start to internalize the other person's actions or lack of actions, creating a very deep loss of self, like something is wrong with them. The final type is an anxious attachment, is where somebody is clinging to other people in a very unbalanced, unhealthy way. The reason it can be seen as silent abuse is when someone is overwhelming someone and guilt-tripping someone over and over again to meet the other person's emotional needs because they cannot meet their own needs. These people often over-communicate and overshare and get mad when people are not there for them. Now, from all three, I believe this is the one that is the least talked about and the most secret and silent one. People do not realize the amount of pressure that these types put on other people. It becomes very much a coach-client dynamic where the coach becomes very exhausted because they always have to be there for the other person. Often, this anxious attachment style could even turn into the fearful avoidance style. If somebody is not meeting their needs because they can't meet their own needs, they're eventually just going to cut them off, leaving the other person feeling shame and guilt. The great part about this is when you become aware of those 3 types and you start recognizing certain things in yourself, you can change this behavior. So let's become aware. So if you are the first type, a dismissive avoidant that dismisses, avoids, and does not want to feel any negative emotions, you have to learn to master sitting with your discomfort in your body. So you can do things like start scanning your body when you feel uncomfortable emotions and sit with that. If you have thoughts and feelings that are coming up that make you uncomfortable, write them down so they don't fester in your mind. If they're on paper, you can see them much more clearly. And then I would urge you to validate them. Don't ignore and just throw them out. Really look at them and say, it's okay to feel. I'm allowed to feel. Learn to sit with your uncomfortable feelings, because if you stop ignoring yours, then you will stop ignoring others. I would also encourage you to not do things to distract yourself when you are having negative thoughts and feelings. A lot of people like to stay busy, go to the gym, start cleaning. I would actually encourage you to do the opposite and just sit with yourself and validate the heck out of your emotions, because you matter and your feelings matter. You can also learn to use your senses to their full potential. So if you find yourself spiraling a little too much in the negative because you haven't dealt with them for so long, just listen to some subtle sounds and then listen to the further sounds and learn to calm yourself and be in the present moment. Remember, you cannot have compassion and be there for other people if you cannot be there for yourself. Now, the second one, that is inconsistent, the fearful avoidant, needs to learn about emotional regulation. They need to learn that they are enough. They are more than enough. They are worthy and they are valuable because they exist. Nothing external can take away your value or give you more value. When these types get triggered, they have to go internal, not external. They can use techniques like micro-pausing from 10 to 30 seconds, pausing before they react, and while they pause, they can self-validate. Now, this type is usually a lot in their head and in their mind, so they can learn to ground themselves. So if they're having a triggered response, they can sit down. They can even use external tools like a bracelet or a rock, something to remind themselves to pause before reacting. The fearful and the dismissive avoidant both have to learn that when they leave someone, they have to give the other person respect by telling them how much time they need. It has to be a healthy amount of time. You don't need days to process things, just a couple of minutes, couple of hours, and then you regroup yourself and you do self-reflection during that time, and then you can come back with a much calmer tone. And the third anxious type also needs to learn how to self-validate. They need to learn how to be bored and how to be alone. They need to remember that their voice and their validation is enough. They don't need it external. That's just a bonus. If they don't and depend on others, it could turn into manipulation. If you recognize yourself in this, don't shame yourself through this process. Remember, your responses is not who you are. Unfortunately, we can't change the past, but every day we get to decide what kind of influence we want to have on our relationships and our future.